In 1979, because of that request, we started NACD. Some of the things that are significant and different about what we are and what we do is that, first of all, we operate from what we call a parent's perspective. Parent's perspective essentially is you can never do it well enough or fast enough. Okay? What you do never is good enough. So what we are driven to do from 1979 to today is find better ways to do it. And we have never done anything where we say, gee, we've solved this problem, we've got all the answers, gee, let's just continue doing what we're doing. All right? Which is one of the reasons why I've got like 10 books that are partially written, because as soon as I get going and think I've got something, it changes. So, I don't know that I'll ever get the books written, because I don't know I'll ever get to a point where I'm happy to say, gee, we have enough knowledge to now say this is what is. Okay? So we're constantly in the flux of changing and development. We utilize over today 3,000 different specific techniques and methodologies. All right? And as an international organization, we are constantly looking at what's out there and seeing if it has value and trying to determine, is this something that we want to pursue or is not something we want to pursue. That's actually a relatively difficult job because you hear a lot of hype about a lot of things. And a lot of things, are supposedly the magic pill or the magic cure. And, typically, what we see is, we hear about this great thing and for example, secretin was one of them, all right? Secretin was first the big thing. It was one kid who was dramatically helped. And then the data coming in for the first few months is it produces dramatic improvement in virtually 100% of the kids. And 6 months later, it produces pretty dramatic improvement in about 75% of the kids. Then it was, 9 months later, well, gee, we see some improvement in about 25% of the kids, and it generally it ends up about, maybe 10% of the kids have some response to it. Well, there's a lot of things that come down the pike like that. All right. Then we run into the problem of perspective as to what is good. We'll hear about methods, and I'll go and I'll either meet with or talk with whoever was developing it, and they're all excited about the fantastic results they see. And then we quickly discover it's a problem of perspective. Because often their perspective was they're dealing with something you can't change, and if they see any change, they think it is dramatic change. Well, our perspective generally is, for kids in the autism spectrum, the job is to make these kids normal. All right, and if we achieve that, we've achieved the goal. If we haven't achieved that, we have not achieved the goal. All right? So we expect to see significant change working toward that goal of producing normalcy. So that's our criteria. All right. Success is the kids are no longer autistic. Okay. That's the perspective. All right.
I have a question.
Sure. Well, we have many, many kids who, you could meet or talk to, or, supposed experts could evaluate, and nobody would have a clue they ever had the diagnosis. So, yeah, I most definitely think that's possible.
Well, I like that answer. It's just some people don't believe that.
Well, a lot of people don't believe that because a lot of people have never seen that. Yeah. And fortunately we have, and our perspective is that those kids who have not achieved it have not achieved it because we haven't figured out how to get there yet, not because they can't get there. Which brings up kind of another subject. One of the reasons why the development in this field and the related fields is sadly as slow as it usually is because for the most part we have people who create approaches or treatments or methodologies who then devote the rest of their career to proving that that treatment technique works. And as such, that's what they do. All right, so you go to this one and he uses that technique, and that one uses that technique, and that one uses that technique. Then they all fight about which is the best technique. All right. You know, the reality is all our kids are different. Different things are going to work for different kids. And we have to take all the various things out there that work for some kids and make them available and try to understand, you know, this is the most logical way to start with this one, and if this direction keeps working, great. If not, we go that direction. If not, we go that direction. And you continually modify to find the pieces that put it together for that specific child. Yeah. So I say we have over 3,000 different specific techniques we use, because the more successful we are depends on, are we being successful at finding the specific approaches that work for that specific child. Yeah. Also relative to that, you know, we kind of looked at our data and we've been responsible for something like 3 million hours of specific intervention with kids. All right, meaning that we've designed the programs and we've supervised the programs with the family. So 3 million hours of intervention. With all those children, with all those hours, I can safely say we've never written the same program twice. Okay? You can sit and go through all our files and look at every evaluation and every program, and I'd be shocked if you could find 2 programs that were the same, because the kids are different. Right? And a big part of our perspective is the uniqueness of each of your kids, of each of the kids we see. All right? And our perspective is also that being unique, no one on the planet knows what any given child's potential is. And also, until proven otherwise, our perception is every child has unlimited potential. It's important to understand that a lack of function does not equate with a lack of potential to produce the function. Okay? Because a child can't do something, that is not a prognosis for what they can do. Just simply a statement of where they are. And the perception needs to be, you need to provide the opportunity so as to change that. Okay. So that's where we operate from. All right? And that's kind of our perspective. And with that, you know, we also tend to rather ignore labels. Okay, one of the things we do not do is label a child. You know, lots of people are more than happy to go label a child if it makes you feel better to have a label. You know, great. A lot of people will do that. We don't have the need to do that. All right. You know, we look at the child as a unique individual and try to understand that child as best we can, and then try to design the best program we possibly can. Yes, ma'am?
That's a good question, though, because if you don't label them, but then they're mainstream in school, and you've got to explain to their teacher, but if you don't want to label them, how do you... We don't need,
as I say, there's plenty of people out there who will give your kid a label.
No.
And the schools will give your child a label.
Do you help the parents then to communicate with parents so that you don't have to say, my kid has this? You say this are his challenges. I mean, I'm sure I could figure out a way, but is there a way you guys recommend on saying that then without having to?
Well, unfortunately, you know, if you're working with the schools are going to have to classify.
There's no way around that.
You know, if you've got, you know, a child with more mild problems, you know, you get a more mild label.
Right.
Okay. But it's important that most of the labels kind of come from the need for administrative classifications. It also comes from the problem of the medical model. You know, we're applying medical models to developmental problems. All right, and the medical model essentially is the first thing you do is make a diagnosis. That's a label. Fortunately, the second thing you do in the medical model is make a prognosis based on the diagnosis. And then sadly, the third thing you do is apply accepted procedures. All right? And for our kids with developmental issues, all three of them are bad. Okay? Because they're all tend to be limiting. Yes, ma'am.
My thoughts with the same thing with the educators, where they tend to already say, well, the child needs to be on medication because it's like a diabetic child. He needs it to function in society. And when the educator and the principal and everyone around her supports her, it makes me feel incompetent that she's not being able to open up or try to modify her classroom, just not to accommodate him, but to try to understand his.
Yeah, labels do not assist in the process of seeing your child as unique. And unfortunately, your child is perceived, if you will, relative to historic failure with similar children. So, you know, part of your job as a parent, you know, is to be the advocate for your child and talk about the uniqueness of your child and determine what his needs are as a unique individual. Okay. You know, part of what's also important to understand is, you know, we tend to perceive these issues as being unique issues, all right, because of this disease model. You know, it's important to understand, you know, that virtually every child with a developmental problem, be it a brain-injured child, a child with Down syndrome, or a child with quote-unquote autism spectrum, share a lot of very similar things. Okay? And it's a continuum. And, you know, we tend to kind of look at, all of us are on this continuum, and we got someone who's in deep coma on this end, and we got Superman up this end, and we're moving up that continuum. And we're all on there somewhere. Okay? I got an interesting insight into this when I was living in Europe. You know, going to school, you know, I had this perception there were these different countries in Europe. All right, there's Spain, and there's France, and there's Germany, and there's Austria, and each one of them is a unique country with unique language. They speak Spanish in Spain, and they speak French in France, and they speak German. Well, you know what? It's not that way at all. You know, as you move, you know, from like the south of Spain north, you see this transition, and the language transition and changes. And just because there's a border, it doesn't mean, well, we speak one language here and another language. No. You know, or we're French here, we're Spanish. No, it's this continuum. It changes as you move through. And our kids are the same way. They're on this continuum. You know, I had this one child I saw down in Texas. And when she first came to us, she had been labeled by the school district as being autistic. And she was in a special ed class. And about 6 months into working with her, she had improved significantly. And the school reassessed her and said, oops, we made a mistake. You know, she's not autistic, she's Asperger's. Right? 6 months later, she had made enough change. They said, well, we better evaluate her again, and they did say, oops, we made a mistake, she's not Asperger's, she's ADHD. To make a long story short, pretty much every 6 months they reassessed her, and she ended up in the gifted program. Yeah. By the way, a lot of our kids in the spectrum, we do better ultimately if we put them in school in the gifted programs. Because you're allowed to be a little quirky in the gifted programs, you know? I had this one girl I worked with from Sacramento years ago, and she was one we took from, you know, severely involved special ed class and ended up in the gifted class. And the last thing I had a hard time getting rid of was she was so intense when she worked, if she were writing, she'd be writing on her paper on her desk, and she'd go at it with such intensity that she'd push the paper off the desk, and she'd just follow it to the floor, and finish working on the floor. But in the gifted program, that was okay, Can't do that in regular class, but gifted program, that's cool. So we look at the kids on a spectrum, and our job is to move them up that spectrum, all right, and not to categorize them and classify them. Okay. By the way, part of what is significant relative to our experience with NACD, we work with an international clientele. We work with kids from all over the United States. Our families are pretty much the creme de la creme of families, if you will. Okay, they're the families that say, we want to assume the responsibility for our kids, we want to be actively involved for our kids, and they're the families that are out there looking for everything and anything that works. So part of what's neat about our position is our families are constantly looking for other things to do. So they're on an NACD program, but they're experimenting with the latest different biomedical approaches, all right, and different techniques and methodologies, and we're getting an opportunity to find out what works, because our kids are not just doing our thing, they're doing these other things. So we're getting all this information. And as I say, when we have all of our kids are being approached the same way by all our staff. We meet regularly, we modify how we're approaching different things, but we essentially are doing things the same way. So we're able to find out what works from what we're doing and what works and doesn't work from what other people are doing. Part of, again, what's been difficult in the field and why the progress has been so slow is virtually every therapist out there functions autonomously. Okay, they're pretty much all doing their own thing. And sadly, not only are they doing their own thing, often their own thing is the specific methodology they were trained in. All right, so they just keep doing the same thing over and over again. I love hearing things like from OTs. We have, for example, in terms of tactile techniques, we probably have something like 200 different tactile protocols that we use. Okay. And I'll hear things from OTs that, they'll see what one of our families are doing, and their comment will be, they're doing it wrong. And the family says, why is it wrong? I says, well, this is how you do tactile stimulation. There's only one way to do tactile stimulation. Well, there's only one way to do it if you only know one way to do it. Okay. They say we have about 200 different ways we do it, and talk to us, in a couple months, and we'll have 220 different ways to do it. We'll have, all right. So that's part of why the development is as slow as it is in the field, and how hard it is to kind of educate the people who are working in the field.